Welcome to Off the Record with me, Sunny Nayombia. Every Friday, I bring a brand new perspective to the week's old headlines. So sit back, relax, and let's get that conversation going. But before we do, make sure you hit that follow button. And now, let's get into the very first headline. First of all, I'd like to apologize for not releasing a podcast last week. I was unfortunately quite ill, but I'm feeling much better now. And while I am feeling much better now, there are at least 5,600 pastors nationwide who are not feeling great today. They and their houses of worship have fallen foul of the law regulating religious organizations and have been forced to close their doors. The over 5,600 churches have been closed after a nationwide operation led by the Rwanda Governance Board that started on the 29th of July. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, this was a move that was long overdue. These shanty churches were unsafe, unhygienic, and many operated without official permits. In fact, out of the churches that were closed, 100 of them were cave churches. Cave churches. People were literally squeezing themselves into caves in hills and quote unquote worshiping God. Seriously. What kind of madness is this? I understand that we are supposed to bow at the altar of religious freedom, but I must say, I'm extremely happy with the moves that the government of Rwanda has recently been making. As I said last time, freedom of worship doesn't mean that you make people sit in half-completed churches that risk falling on them. It doesn't mean disturbing neighbors with loud gospel music at all hours of the night. And it certainly doesn't mean preaching uneducated, half-baked sermons to vulnerable and desperate people. Happily, it seems that President Kagame and I have the same thought process when it comes to these shanty churches. In an address to Parliament on Wednesday, he went in hard, and I mean hard, on these very issues. Calling the churches exploitative, he accused some so-called pastors of establishing fly-by-night churches in order to squeeze the little money and resources poor people have in order to enrich themselves. He went so far as to accuse these churches of acting like scammers. And because they were acting like businesses, he warned that the government would start taxing church tithes and incomes just like it does normal non-religious businesses. Imagine that. Church pastors paying income tax. Personally, I love it. The question we need to ask ourselves is this: what is it about us as Rwandans and as Africans that make us so vulnerable to a lot of religious foolishness? How is it that we are so poor, so very poor, but can afford to spend so much time and financial resources in mystical practices? Seriously, if prayers, fasting for days, and speaking in tongues was going to lift us out of poverty, wouldn't it have already? I mean, literally no one prays harder than Black Africans. But guess what? Despite being so quote-unquote religious, we are at the bottom of every single development metric. Our children are stunted, our roads are deadly, and our factories grow at only a snail's pace. On the other hand, though, our pastors, bishops, and so-called prophets are living large, buying huge four-wheel drive cars, sending their children to schools in America, and giving their wives opulent lifestyles. Funny enough, the least religious people, the Chinese, the Europeans, and the North Americans, are the most wealthy, most productive people in the world. Actually, it seems to me that there is a direct correlation between religiosity and development. The more you pray, it seems, the poorer you become. I guess the question that we need to answer is this: Is it our lot in lives as Africans to only taste the good life if we die and go to heaven or get a visa to the West? Are those our only choices? Or can we work hard and organize ourselves effectively to combat the poverty and squalor we find ourselves in? The choice is ours at the end of the day. I just hope that we choose correctly. Now, for the last few weeks, I've been enjoying the Summer Games in Paris and cheering for every team and athlete representing Africa. As an African, I felt immense pride watching Botswana's Litsile Tebogo win gold in the 200 meters. I cheered as our East African brothers and sisters from Uganda and Kenya performed exceptionally well in middle and long distance running events. The West Africans took home a few medals, as did the North Africans. All in all, it was a successful Olympics for many Africans, just not Rwandans. Not only did the 8-person Rwandan team fail to win a single medal, but they didn't even compete. They did not compete at all. They were not. No, none of our athletes were 4th, 5th, 6th, 10th even. It's just embarrassing. I'm not trying to be harsh toward our athletes, who I'm sure gave their very best effort. But let's be honest. Rwanda was embarrassingly bad. I wish I could say our lack of medals was due to our small population and limited financial resources. But the fact that that tiny Capo Verde, with a population of just over 500,000, won a medal, albeit bronze, proves that size doesn't equal performance. Rwanda's poor performance in Paris isn't a fluke. Over the last 30 years, 30 years, we've won 0 medals at the Summer Olympics in Tokyo, Rio, London, Beijing, Athens, Sydney, and Atlanta. And if we're not careful, we'll continue this shameful streak in Los Angeles in 2028. What I love most about sports is its simplicity. What you put in is what you get out. No matter what you do, if you do not do the correct foundational work, you'll never see success. So, when I see our athletes fail repeatedly, I know it's a failure at the structural level. There is plenty of blame to go around, with the Ministry of Sports and the Rwanda National Olympic Committee carrying most of this blame, in my view. But, there's no point in crying over spilt milk. What's done is done. What I want to know, though, is what is the plan moving forward? Does the sports ministry have a strategic plan to identify and nurture talent? Is it providing coaching skills to primary and secondary school teachers? Is it working to partner with major local private sector players like, say, MTN and Bank of Kigali to support athletics? Back before colonialism, Rwandans were known to be historically good at high jump and archery. Can there be a strategic program to find talent in these two sports? How about shooting? Our military and police forces include tens of thousands of young men and women with basic proficiency in shooting. Are you telling me that our security services cannot identify a few people who can compete in Olympic shooting competitions? I don't believe so. How about this? Do we have strategic plans to build high-altitude training centers in, say, the mountains of Nyamagabe, Rutsiro, and Musanze for our athletes? If we do have these plans, when are these training centers opening? We need them to open yesterday. I know it's tempting to wallow in our sporting mediocrity and come up with all sorts of excuses as to why we cannot compete internationally. But we must resist that temptation. The blueprint for sporting success is well known. All we have to do is follow it. The question is, do we want to, or are we just happy to be mediocre? I'm hoping that those concerned act and act fast. The idea of another Rwandan Olympic team failing utterly in Los Angeles in the next 4 years is not only heartbreaking, but utterly embarrassing. To be honest, if nothing is done soon, heads must roll. We cannot keep being the laughingstock of the region. We deserve better as Rwandans. Now, the last story of the week is about the consequence of greed. Early last month, a local newspaper, The New Times, reported that the Rwanda Investigation Bureau had arrested 38-year-old David Manzi on suspicion of swindling $10 million. $10 million. $10 million. Let's think about it. $10 million from 500 people. According to the newspaper, Davis had used his online forex company called Billions Traders FX to launder money and engage in illegal foreign exchange trade and fraud. So let's do the math. If he defrauded 500 people out of $10 million, that means that on average, each person on average gave him about $20,000 or about 27 million Rwandan francs. Now, what that tells me, what those numbers tell me, is that he wasn't defrauding uneducated poor people. No, he was defrauding rich men and women, the creme de la creme of Rwandan society. And by the way, it wouldn't be the first time that Rwanda's best and so-called brightest fell into such fraud. Maybe some of you might not remember, but let me remind you of the chia seed debacle. In 2022, the hottest commodity in Rwanda wasn't tea or coffee. No, it was chia seeds. It seemed to me at that time that every person with a little bit of land was being urged to plant chia seeds by some company called Akens and Kernels Limited, with a promise that in less than 6 months, they would receive 3 to 6 times their initial investment that they've made in chia farming. And funny enough, it was only after, say, a year or so, and after government got involved, that people finally realized that it all fallen prey to a complex pyramid scheme. And guess what? Even then, people lost millions of dollars. What I want to ask is this: what is it about us that makes us keep falling for these get-rich schemes? What is going on in our minds? I can understand a peasant falling victim to a pyramid scheme, but how can a minister fall for it? How can a general? It can't be because of education. I mean, even people with PhDs are allowing themselves to become victims of fraudsters. There is a saying that I live by, and it goes something like this: if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. So, here's my advice. Instead of playing Dear Rwandans, Dear Africans, in arenas that you shouldn't be in, stick to things you know. Put your money in a government bond, buy a piece of real estate, or even put your money in a boring savings account. At least that way, you'll be able to sleep soundly at night. And isn't sound sleep worth every penny? I think so. And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Thank you so much for making it to the very end. Remember to follow us on our social media and to make sure to check out our other podcast, The Long Form with Sunny Nayombia. It comes out every Monday like clockwork. Hope to have you back next Friday. Have a great weekend.